I'd like to introduce Anne from England, who takes LDN for ME. Thank you for joining me, Anne.
That's a pleasure.
Could you tell me when you first started to notice your ME symptoms? How long ago was it?
That was as a child, actually, age 3 or 4.
Really?
Yes, and I'm now 78, so I've had it all those years.
Goodness me. Did they recognise it back then?
No, they didn't. It's hereditary. In my case, it's hereditary. My grandfather had it, my Scottish grandfather. Got it in later life, and he was ill, more or less, until the end of his days. He could only get up. He was in bed until 11 in the morning, got his dressing gown on, came down, had his porridge, back upstairs, sleep, back up, or back down for lunch, dressed. Then he sat in the chair for a couple of hours, back up for sleeps, and then he came down in the evening for his evening meal, and he was sitting in the chair then till 11 or 12. And that was his life.
And what did they call it back then?
They didn't know. They thought it was psychological because he couldn't speak to people very much. The brain is very bad, his was, and he could only speak to, he didn't join the relatives when they came up. He was just a recluse. And my mother had it as well, but it was triggered with her when she had her children, myself and my brother. And that she could never get up in the morning, used to stay in bed till 11, much to the criticism of the family, not us, but my father and other people. And she was always limited in energy, but she carried on and nursed me with TB and my brother with pneumonia. And that it's amazing she could do that. But no, she was just tired and had no energy. Of course, there was nothing done. Nothing.
Yeah. And did your mother or your grandfather have the other symptoms that people often have with ME?
I couldn't say. Well, I think I've mentioned my grandfather. It's the brain, which is very, very bad, and he just couldn't socialize. So that was bad enough. And the exhaustion meant that he slept most of the day, which I've just related to you. I think my grandmother did all the accounts and things like that. I'm sure she did that. He could read. He read his newspaper. And noise, we couldn't make noise. We went up to live with them, live with my grandparents when I was very young, which is what we have, isn't it? He didn't seem to have sensitivity to light because he could read his paper. My mother did everything sort of fairly normal because she could never go to night classes and learn things. That's why she didn't go. So she actually was very wise and knew she had no energy, and she adapted to that condition in her doing. She always did the housework. She had somebody in to help her with that, but she always sat down in the afternoon, and she felt tired the whole time. And that was until she was 61, and she died of cancer at that point.
Oh dear.
So no.
As a child, Anne, you said you had it from about the age of 3. What was the pattern of your life?
Well, a typical one for ME people. But when I got any illness, it was worse for me. You know how it is with ME. Your immune system doesn't fight. And when I had tonsillitis, I had bouts of tonsillitis, I remember. And of course, the tonsils came out, which was the worst thing. And I never felt well, really well. And doing exercise at school, the swimming and hockey was really, really hell. But all the same, I did play games, and I played with my brother. And then after that operation, I got bronchial asthma, so I had that more or less all my childhood and teenagers, and that meant that every winter I had a a couple of doses of bronchitis, which I have now every year until LDN, but I'll explain that later.
Okay.
So I didn't have a diagnosis at all until I was 59.
Mm-hmm.
And then I marvelously got a diagnosis and could give up work because I was working all the time. But I had to give up my full-time teaching job in 1976 because I became so ill with we don't know what it was type of thing. Mm-hmm. So I gave up teaching in Welwyn Garden City, and I moved to Brighton without a penny. Actually, I had £100, something like that. My father, who could support me, help me, didn't, because he didn't believe there's anything wrong with me.
Oh,
so no, but that's how ME is, isn't it, for many people of my age and younger. The doctors said you did to get out and do this and do that, because of course you can't, can you?
No.
With ME. So it was unsympathetic doctor. The usual story that lots of people have. And then what happened was I retired. I got early retirement. I was so lucky. I got the diagnosis from somebody told me about ME just by going into a health shop, and I was sort of trying to get things for my symptoms, and I explained them to the very nice man, and he told me about ME. So that was when I got my diagnosis from a doctor locally. I had to pay to get the diagnosis. So then that was the first time I'd heard what it was, and it was such a relief to know it wasn't mental or, the other things that it's labelled. So when I got early retirement, and again I was terribly, terribly lucky because it wasn't the GP that I saw. It was somebody was substituting for him at that particular time, and I got the tip off from somebody with ME to go to him to get my physical examination, which I had to have to retire early. So I went there, and of course he knew about ME because he asked me, "Do you have vivid dreams, vivid colour dreams?" Well, I do, because it shows the brain's not working. So at last I got it. Within 6 months I was accepted for early retirement, thank God. And then I thought, I'm going to be better. Now I'm retired, rest, I'm going to be better. But it didn't work that way, because all the time I've been pushing myself to teach, all the many years I've been doing it, it had a reaction. You don't suddenly stop teaching and then get better with ME, do you?
That's right.
You don't. So I was ill for a year and that sort of thing, in bed, even though I wasn't working. But during that time, before that, I was teaching part-time. I was a supply teacher before that time that I got early retirement. I had a job for 2 days a week teaching art. I'm an art teacher all the time in one school. But the rest of the time, I had to do supply teaching. And when that was going on, whilst that was going on, if I was ill, which I was, suddenly couldn't do it, I had to tell lies to the unemployment people and say that there weren't the jobs, instead of telling the truth and say I was ill. So I did that for a long time. So that's basically it. And now, since I've been retired many years, but I still have the symptoms. I'm talking about the past now. And that since taking LDN, can I come on to that now, do you think? Would that be all right?
Yeah. Could you tell us how you heard about LDN to start with?
Yes, it was a friend of mine who lived in Lewis. She knew a family, and I always knew the little girl had was not well for years. I remember seeing her, and it was she, the child who was then grown up. She was a university student. Tried LDN. She was trying it at the time, so I got the details from her. And actually, also the information of where she went to get it. So that's how I came to hear about it, and I followed the trail.
Mm-hmm. And how long ago was that, Anne?
Pardon, dear, sorry.
When did you start LDN?
Oh, about a year ago.
Okay.
A year and a bit now, yes.
Okay. So you got your LDN, and what was your journey?
Oh, sorry. The journey was a very great. Well, I saw this doctor at Burswood Christian Hospital. It is, and it's way away from here. It's very near Tunbridge Wells, a place called Groombridge. And I went with this daughter who was taking it, the one that was taking was ill with ME and taking LDN, and her mother, and I went with them to see this doctor, who was very, very charming. And he gave me instructions how to do it very, very gradually. So then I went away and started doing it very slowly. And I didn't see anything happening in the beginning. But then suddenly I realized, I've been taking it last winter, that I never had an attack of bronchitis where I had to go to bed. I had to go to bed for weeks. And it stopped. I had the chest symptoms, but they didn't materialize into such a severity that I had to stay in bed. So that was the first thing that I noticed about this drug. Also, that I could plan a little more than I was used to doing. I've never been on holidays for ages. I used to go up to Scotland, but I still can't or couldn't do that, take journeys. Still the same sort of life. But the brain wasn't as bad. My brain symptoms were always severe. And when the foggy brain is used as a method of description of our brain symptoms, that is nothing compared with what I have in my brain symptoms, because possibly I've had it for so long. Going back to childhood, I had the brain symptoms then, that I couldn't concentrate on mathematics, for example. I just couldn't remember facts at school. But nonetheless, I used to get prizes there for art and music, which must have been that side of the brain that could actually function more than the factual side of the brain. I won't go into the scientific explanation for that because I'll get in a muddle, so I won't go into that. But yes, I noticed that, and I noticed that I could hardly get out of bed in the mornings. Usually I had to go back, have a breakfast and go back to bed. And now I can wait at 8 o'clock in the morning and get up and go out after that and do something in the morning. Or what I've always done throughout my time in Sussex from 76, I've always had a car and I've always been able to drive the days that I'm not too ill. So in those days I go out and see gardens, National Trust, you name it. It's a lovely sort of thing to do, and it's healing as well. So I found that when I went to Wakehurst Place, before I got the diagnosis and took LDN, I could only walk as far as the lawn at the house. But then with taking LDN, I could go farther and walk round the garden and just have no reaction afterwards. So I've noticed those things. Main thing is the more energy. For example, for 13 years since I've been in this flat, I haven't had the energy to redecorate it. I had it done when I first came in, chose the wrong colours, I chose very dark, Victorian pinks and so on. But I've just had it redone, and I did all the packing up of the ornaments and things like that. I was able to do it and able to get up at 8, and the chappie to paint came in at 9, and I was able to do that and go with him to get the paint. All those things I could never have done before.
That's amazing.
Yes, Absolutely. And phone calls, for example, I'm still at the stage where in the evening, after using my brain during the day for the normal routine things, you'll understand, sort of cooking and running your own life with all the paperwork you have to do and the signing of everything. It's a lot easier. It's just easier to do without having a sort of reaction afterwards. So I could do that. I haven't been on holiday yet. I used to go sometimes to Scotland, to Skilcoobry, but I might be able to.
Well, exactly. It really sounds as though you're definitely getting your life back on track, Anne, after all this time.
Well, yes, absolutely. And there's a spiritual side to this, which I won't go into, because this is not the nature of this interview, really. The interview is for facts and the result that LDN has had on my life, which it has. I'd still find the computer, I did get a computer, very difficult to look at the screen for an amount of time. We can't concentrate on what's in front of us, and I still find that hard. But at least I can send an email and look at the emails. I can do that. Pardon?
That's good. And hopefully over time things will continue improving for you. I mean, I think I improved for about 18 months on LDN and got stronger as time went on. Yes. And
one thing I was going to say, that everything was going all right. I was ordering the LDN from Glasgow. The doctor wrote me a 6-month prescription, and I sent it to Glasgow, the place that you get it from. And they were sending it and so on. And then there came a time when I was running out, and I rang them for an appointment at Burswood, because I didn't think the doctor, wrongly thought the doctor wouldn't give me a prescription without my seeing him. And I ran out, and there was a week without it, and I was so ill after that.
Really?
Yes, because of the symptoms that came, they all came back because I'd stopped something that I've been having for nearly a year. So I won't let that happen again. What I should have done is tell you that the lack of judgment that we have. I could have phoned them and say, look, I must have a prescription. Could you pass this message on to Dr. Paul? But I didn't think of doing that until afterwards. Anyway, I've got it now, and it's taken me a couple of months to get back to where I was before.
Well, that's a lesson learned, isn't it?
That is a lesson learned, and to be more, I've got an appointment with him that I absolutely forgot, July the 4th. I completely forgot it because of the decorators. So I've got another one in August, and hopefully he wants to see me and put me through, the routine, ask me questions, so on, before he gives me the prescription. But it is a bind to go out there. I will try and drive this time, drive myself, because the last time I went with the friends of my friend, I was absolutely exhausted mentally when I went in to see him, because I have to talk, don't you? You've got to talk to people.
Right.
And what happened was, the young woman didn't have an appointment, and I didn't realize that what they did, they snaffled a bit of my appointment at the end of mine.
Right.
So I go on my own now.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us, Anne. I really do appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, and I hope it's been of some help to other people, older people as well.